Are you ready?
Activate.
Sequence start 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, ignition.
Well, good evening to everyone, and welcome to Shadows in the Dark. As always, I'm your host, Jeremiah Greer. Now, hope everyone was having a great weekend. Of course, tomorrow is Monday morning. Back to the workforce we go. A few things, excuse me there, a few things before we get the show started. First off, we do have our chat room going as always, and you can access that from our host page here on Blog Talk Radio. So if you feel free to join us in the chat room as we go along. You can direct your questions through the chat as always, or we also always have our lines open, 718-508-9887. Feel free to call in if you wish. Don't forget that we also have our poll that we put up. We're kind of doing something a little different here, so we're hoping that we get a lot of participation in it. And instead of doing a poll, what we are doing is we're asking you to submit your paranormal stories. And we're going to take November the 29th, and we're going to read them on the air. And we may even do something a little special with it. We may submit all the stories into a drawing and draw for some kind of prize, maybe a T-shirt, a book, or something like that. So that should be kind of fun, something a little new for us. So when you fill it out, make sure you'll have 3 fields there: your first name, your email address, and then your story. Please try to be as detailed as possible, dates, times, anything that relates to the story. Try to write it the best way you can. We're most likely going to read it straight off of what you submit. So look forward to that, and we hope we get the participation. So like I said, participation on it. It is something a little different. Remember that, excuse me there, I'm kind of got a little, my mind drew a little blank there. Make sure that you put your email address in there, because if we do a drawing, we are going to have to contact you to let you know you won. Sorry about that little pause there, folks. Also, don't forget our Halloween special coming up. We also are allowed to do longer hours now. We're going to be starting that with the Halloween special. So, we can go an hour like we always have. We can go an hour and a half, or we can go 2 hours. And these shows will broadcast live. As everyone knows, we could always go up to 2 hours, but the live listeners were cut off at the hour mark, and you had to go back and listen to the archive. Well, now we can broadcast live up to 2 hours. So we are going to start doing that. We're going to leave it up to the guests, though. Not every show is going to be 2 hours. So if the guest only wants to do an hour, that's what we're going to let them do. If they want to do 2 hours, we'll do that. But we're going to start with our Halloween special, which is going to be an hour and a half. It's going to be 1.5 hours long. So look forward to that. New times, new length of show, so that should be fun to do. All right, well, we're going to get ready to get to our show here in a minute. We'll take a quick little break, about 30 seconds. And we'll be right back, and we're going to talk about Strange America with our guest, Robert Schneck. So back in just a moment. Robert Damon Schneck, sorry about that, America's Historian of the Strange, is the author of The President's Vampire, Strange But True Tales of the United States of America, as well as several books for young readers, including Detective Notebook, Are You Psychic? He's also a freelance writer who contributes to Fate and 14 Times and other magazines. Robert has carried out parapsychology experiments, participated in ghost hunts, and tries to visit the places he writes about. This has led him to some odd locations. Robert, welcome to the show.
Good to be here, Jeremiah. Thank you.
All right. Well, I'm glad you could make it. I'm sorry I seem to just be all tongue-tied today, and I don't know what is going on.
It happens sometimes. Maybe it's the phase of the moon.
Well, we had the full moon just the other day, and our show, we had a little problem with it. It sounded a little weird on a full moon.
It happens.
That's right. Well, Robert, let's start off with exactly how you got interested in the strange and weird tales of the United States.
Well, it actually started a few years ago when I was doing some pieces for the 40 Times. Now, I had been wanting to do a book for years, and it occurred to me that might be the easiest way to do that would be to write about something with a similar theme over and over again. So I decided, well, I'm an American, and I love the paranormal and the strange, so I will write about American paranormal strange stories. It also allowed me to do the research because it's all in this country. It's almost all in English. So I began to produce a story here and a story there. Did one for Fate, did one for the 40 Times, and it turned into a book. Probably the easiest way to write a book. And then when the stories were finished, they were just magazine length. So I went back and I took a lot of the research that I wasn't able to use and put it into the final book.
Mm-hmm. Now, was there any particular story that got you interested?
Well, I've been doing this pretty much full time since I was 9. So I have a filing cabinet full of clippings, piles of magazines, books. It's come down to I have a choice. I can sit or I can get more books, and I'm pretty much out of space. It was really nothing in particular. I just knew I wanted to start to put some of these things together into a book.
So at 9 years old, that's kind of a young age to get interested.
Well, I went from dinosaurs to
strange.
Yeah, it was pretty.
Well, there you go.
I mean, I remember the first books were by Ivan Sanderson and Bernard Heuvelman, people like that, who wrote about Bigfoot and lake monsters and sea monsters. It started out with monsters. I love monsters. But then it moved on to other aspects of the strange. So I also got into ghosts and spiritualism, bizarre crime. Just if it's odd, I'll generally take a look at it.
It's kind of funny that you mentioned kind of started with dinosaurs. It's about the same with me, except for I went from dinosaurs to UFOs. Kind of a strange jump.
Yeah, a lot of people do. And UFOs were very popular when I was a kid. It was one of the there were big flaps going on when I was a kid. I'm 43, so when I was 9, it would have been 1963, and I was born in it would have been 1973. And UFOs were big at the time, and so were things like the Bermuda Triangle, which never interested me. People were starting to pay attention to the Nazca lines down in Peru, and all those sorts of things were very popular. But for me, like I said, it was monsters. I just found the idea that something like that could really, really be alive and be reported by very sane people. That absolutely fascinated me. And it seems like the essence of all the things that we do, to be walking through the woods and suddenly be confronted by the unknown in the form of a monster. I mean, that is really everything we do in a nutshell.
Mm-hmm. Just kind of on the subject of dinosaurs for a minute, do you believe that man and dinosaur coexisted? We've had this a little bit here and there on some past shows, and I always find it interesting.
I don't think the evidence is convincing. I have I understand what a lot of people have put forward, and I'm not convinced by it. However, that said, there is some discussion about things that certainly sound like dinosaurs being reported in Africa. The Mokele Mbembe, the Chipekwe, and a bunch of other things coming out of the Congo that sound like descriptions of little dinosaurs. And if it should turn out that some relic species of dinosaur survived somewhere, then yes, man and dinosaur did live together and still do.
All right.
But like I said, I am going to need to see some really convincing evidence before I believe that.
I agree with you there. But, the paranormal, man, evidence is very slim, isn't it?
It is. In fact, I had a discussion with this about someone the other day. I had just finished a really good book about the Yowie, which is the Australian Bigfoot. Mm-hmm. And I got into a discussion with somebody where I said, I hope that things like Bigfoot and the Yowie are not paranormal, that they really are just strange animals that we haven't caught up with. Because if they're paranormal, we'll never know anything more about them, really. People will continue to have experiences, they'll be very carefully recorded, and we'll always feel like we're on the verge of understanding it, we're on the verge of catching one, but we never actually will. If it's a real animal, though, then we will actually learn things, and it'll turn out that it'll be a fascinating subject. But if it's paranormal, I don't think we'll ever learn all that much.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that.
It's kind of a sad thing because he felt that, well, if it's paranormal, that doesn't mean we can't study it. And my response was 139 years of psychic research has produced what? That we know these things happen sometimes. That's about it. Yeah.
All right, well, let's get into The President's Vampire, Strange But True Tales of the United States of America. Definitely one thing that comes to mind thinking about this is why that name?
Well, it was one of the stories I wrote that I really found interesting. It was something I came across in one of Charles Fort's books, Wild Talents, where he described a murder that took place on a whaling boat out in he described it as it was a murder that took place on a fishing boat out from Boston. It involved one of the sailors on the ship vanished, and then another sailor vanished, and the crew panicked, and they demanded that the ship be searched. So the ship was searched, and they found the ship's cook, whose name was James Brown, with the bodies of the two missing sailors. One was dead and drained of blood, and he was holding the body of the other and sucking the blood out of him. Well, he was put in chains and taken back to Boston, put on trial, found guilty of murder, and was sentenced to be hanged. But President Andrew Johnson, Abraham Lincoln's successor, felt that there was some evidence that he was insane, and he or that the court had not been run quite properly, so the sentence was commuted to life in prison. So he became the president's vampire. Anyway, Brown was sent to prison. Then he was sent to St. Elizabeth's Hospital down in Washington, where, according to the article, he committed 2 more murders and was eventually just put away for good and died in prison. Well, I found this story intriguing. First of all, you don't find this was all supposedly happened in 1867. Now, you just don't hear about many serial killing vampires back in 1867. They're still not common, thank goodness. But I wanted to learn more because I thought this guy might be the first serial killer in American history. And I started digging. And after about 3 or 4 months of going to National Archives and annoying historians and local librarians, I learned some interesting things. And that was that the article that Charles Fort used came from the Brooklyn Daily Eagle in 1892, and it got almost everything wrong. It got the date wrong. It didn't happen in 67. It happened in 1866. 2 sailors did not vanish and did not turn up in the hold. James Brown was not a Portuguese sailor, which was one of the things that he was described in the article. He was actually from New Grenada, a country in South America that no longer exists, and he was the ship's cook. The murder happened after an argument with one of the sailors. He stabbed him with a knife, killed him, and threw the knife overboard. He didn't kill 2 more people in prison, or if he did, there's no record of it. So pretty much what the story came down to was he was put on trial in Boston. Oh, by the way, it wasn't even a fishing boat. It was a whaling boat, and it was not off the coast. It was in the Indian Ocean. But Brown was eventually sent back to Boston, put on trial, and his death sentence was commuted. But this raised another question, and that is, how did this very ordinary crime turn into this vampire melodrama? And I don't know. I can't say for certain. But after poking around in the records for a while, it does have 3 points in common with another story that appeared in 1892. And that involved a real vampire story from Exeter, Rhode Island, where the members of the Brown family, his name was James Brown, members of the Brown family were dying from tuberculosis. And the father, George Brown, he lost his wife, he lost his oldest daughter, he lost his second oldest, he lost the middle daughter, and his son Edwin had become sick. Now, George Brown, I don't know whether someone gave him the idea or whether it was his own idea, but he decided that a member of his family might be a vampire who was feeding on the other members.
Right.
So the bodies of his wife and 2 daughters were dug up, and the wife and oldest daughter, they were decomposed enough not to make you nervous. But the younger one, her name was Mercy, she was not very decomposed. Now, the fact is, she'd only been dead a few months, and she was buried in the middle of winter, so there may have been good reasons why she wasn't that decomposed. But blood was found inside her chest cavity. I think it was in her heart, and her liver didn't seem quite decomposed enough. So those organs were taken out and burned in a small fire, reduced to ashes, and possibly given to Edwin to drink as a cure for his tuberculosis. Now, the story pretty much ends there. There's an excellent book about it called Food for the Dead, written by Michael Bell, where he really explores the subject of New England vampirism. But for my purposes, as nearly as I can tell, it's possible that since these were both New England settings, both had characters named Brown, and both were recorded in 1892, that somewhere some wires got crossed, and the stories were mixed together. But that actually didn't end my research, because while I was poking around, I came across something else that was interesting. In 1892, Bram Stoker was collecting material for Dracula. Now, literary historians know that he had some newspaper clippings from New York. He had a clipping involving the story of a woman that drank her children's blood. And that was from a New York paper. Now, I can't prove this, and it'll take somebody who's a much better researcher than I am, but the 7th chapter of Dracula describes Dracula's trip from Transylvania to England aboard a ship called, I think, the Demeter. And during this trip, the crew disappears one by one, devoured by a vampire. Now, it's just possible that this strange, very confused story that appeared in the Brooklyn Daily Eagle ended up inspiring one of the best chapters in Dracula. But like I said, that'll take someone better than me.
Well, okay, I think well, let me ask you this question first. Just kind of talking about the walls you come across on researching out these stories. How difficult was it to find the truth behind some of these? Like you're definitely that story there where you kind of dig. It really what was published wasn't really the case. Would you find that to be common?
In my experience, newspaper stories are always wrong. Now, that is not really a criticism of newspapers, because when you're writing a newspaper story, it has to be in by 5 or whenever they put the paper to bed.
Right.
So you pretty much have to get it down and hand it in. You can't check everything. Of course, it was worse back in the 19th century when people regularly made up stories because it was a slow news day, and of course it still happens, but it was really a feature of newspapers in the Gilded Age that they would make up stories, and now you've got all these people who are digging around trying to see if the story is true. There's the famous story from Aurora about the flying saucer that supposedly crashed into a windmill. There's the famous story from the Tombstone Epitaph about the cowboys that shot the pterodactyl. They can go on and on and on with these stories that probably have no basis in fact, because they just enjoyed writing a good hoax and a good tall tale. It was a popular form of entertainment in the United States.
Now, what I kind of want to do is, since we're talking about strange and true tales of the United States, is just go through some of them that you've dealt with. Tell us a little bit about them and how you came upon them. Kind of like we talked with the first one there, some of the facts, some of the fiction about it. And one thing I want to start with is I heard you on a show, another show, and you were talking about a Canadian town that faked a haunting.
Yeah. That's not in the book.
Right, but I found it fascinating when you were telling about it that some would go to that length, and the stories that we go over tonight, some of maybe we just throw out a subject, it's like ghost, and maybe tell us a ghost story. It doesn't have to be from the book. That's up to you. Just a good strange and true tale that you have there. So
sure, I'd be happy to.
All right.
Well, the story from Canada took place in around the turn of the century, I think. I wrote the story up. It was one of the first features I ever wrote. It actually appears in the magazine of the Canadian Historical Society. I wrote it a few years ago, so I might be a little fuzzy on the details. I'll have to pull out the copy to check. But it went like this. There was a judge. This was a man of some importance in the town of Windsor, Nova Scotia. And he was the only spiritualist in town. And he began to experience constant paranormal phenomena. He heard raps on the walls. Objects which, you would call apports, would appear all the time. Coins, fruit. They would just drop out of nowhere. There was a sighting of a headless apparition. He saw a barrel roll down the street, apparently on its own steam, change direction and move. When he approached the barrel, he heard the voice of a man who had been hanged coming out of the barrel. The entire town appeared to be under some kind of supernatural siege. Endless phenomena. Well, anyway, he was right. He began to write these things up. He was keeping track of them, and he sent them to the American Society for Psychical Research, which was, I think, in New York at the time. And they approached one of their investigators, Hereward Carrington, to look into this. Now, the judge was not just sending his own letters. He was sending affidavits from other witnesses. So these things were apparently witnessed by 12, 24, 36 people who all attested to the reality. Well, Carrington was intrigued. You rarely get this kind of backup when someone's talking about paranormal phenomena. So he was up north. He was actually looking into the Amherst poltergeist, which was a very violent poltergeist from the previous century. At the time, he was talking to some old witnesses, and he stopped into Windsor to look around and talk to the judge, see what was going on. Well, that morning he spoke to the judge, and he was he got the impression that the judge was very, very open to these things. He was very much involved in spiritualism, very much believed in everything he was describing, and he took him on a tour of the town. First place they stopped was a grocery store, and As they were in the grocery store, an apple whizzed past Carrington's head and landed on the floor. He was pretty impressed by this until he looked at the grocer, who looked like he was trying to keep himself from laughing. Now, from there, they went to a few other places. They visited, the most impressive was when they visited the local furniture factory. And this was where the judge reported the most impressive phenomena was going on. Carrington looked around. It was a regular factory. There were piles of chairs. There were, machines, men working, raw material, lumber, and things like that. And he went upstairs, and he noticed that one of the rocking chairs began to rock. Now, this made an impression on him because you rarely see paranormal phenomena. And this thing was not just being moved by a breeze, it was rocking, and rocking hard. Well, Carrington had to look into this, and he did. And he found the string that was tied to the rocking chair and ran through the floor to where the man was pulling it. He went downstairs, and the judge was sitting in a chair speaking to a spirit. You could hear this sort of vague, but you could hear it, this faraway voice talking to the judge about the spirit world and all these things that were going on, and the judge very happily responding. And Carrington began poking around, and he found a rubber tube in a pile of sacking, which he followed back to a place where someone had obviously been talking before he showed up. As they walked around this factory, coins would fly through the air, tools would drop to the ground, and it was and all the men were doing their best to keep from laughing. Well, finally they ended up in the judge's office, and as they sat there, the pounding would start on the walls, and the judge would point it out, it's happening again, and so on and so on. And Carrington would get up, walk around, and find legal clerks sitting there very busy at work in the next room, and also with that same look on their face. Finally, he left the judge at that point. He just started to interview some of the people in Windsor, and he finally found a girl in a stationery shop who told him that she thought it was just very cruel what people were doing to this poor judge, and that they really shouldn't be doing. She was embarrassed because she did it too. And Carrington went back to New York, and he wrote up a report, which he mailed to the judge, and to which the judge wrote back to the ASPR telling them that Carrington was an idiot, and that all of these things were happening, and that if they can't send someone better, someone more competent to investigate it, well, he didn't know what to do. Now, I finally dug up the name of the judge, which hadn't been printed at the time because they didn't want to embarrass him. I wish I could remember it at the moment, but I can't. But the people in the local historical society found some information about him, and there was one unrelated story about him where someone was looking at him on the street, and he took his lit pipe out of his mouth, stuck it into his vest pocket, and caught on fire. And he's walking down the street on fire without noticing it, which suggests that this was not an acute observer. That was a real pleasure finding that.
That is just a funny story.
Oh, it really is. I mean, it was one of these things that just sounds so improbable. But as I mentioned in the story, the winters are long in Nova Scotia, and this was a way of passing the time.
Now, what period of time did that take place again?
Around the turn of the century, around 1900. In fact, if you look around in their historical society, they still have pictures of the furniture factory, and I think somebody dug up a picture of him for me, but we couldn't reproduce it.
Now, did they ever figure out what the motive was? I mean, they just did it just to pass the time?
It was fun. It was fun, and they apparently there had been a pretty gruesome murder, and somewhere along the line, I remember actually, now I do remember, something had happened which startled the judge and made him think that it was the ghost of this man who had been hanged, and that's apparently what got it all started. Because his response was just so extreme. Also, he was a lecturer on spiritualism, and for non-spiritualists, spiritualism is pretty funny. And when you're the only spiritualist in town, you're going to be a target.
Yeah, very true. Oh man, that was when I heard you tell that story in that other show, I was cracking up. That was
actually, I can't be too self-righteous. I had one of the biggest terrors of my life not too long ago on a ghost hunt down in Virginia. We were in a place called Hupp's Hill, which is a battlefield in the Shenandoah Valley. And there's a cave called Crystal Cavern, which is underneath the battlefield. It's actually really kind of interesting for people that like to do ghost hunting. I'm not a ghost hunter. I was observing. Mm-hmm. And this is like a 3-tiered haunting. It's almost like a wedding cake. On the top, you've got the Stonewall Jackson Museum, which is haunted. Then you've got the battlefield, which is haunted. And then you've got this cave underneath, which is haunted.
Wow.
So it was 4 a.m, and I was down in this cave with a psychic who was trying to do EVPs. And I don't know if you've ever been in a cave at 4 a.m. with the lights off, but it's darker than you can imagine. It is, there's no word for it. It's beyond black. And we had this system worked out so that no one was supposed to go down in the caves unaccompanied. We knew everyone that was down there, etc. And this psychic is doing EVPs across from me in the pitch black. And he's saying, is anyone there? Would anyone like to say anything? That kind of stuff. Well, we were sitting there in the silence, and he said to me in a few minutes, "Did you hear something?" And I said, "No, I didn't hear anything." And then a few minutes later, "Did you hear that?" And I said, "Yes, I did. In fact, you can hear my voice on the tape. It sounds like someone's got their hand wrapped around my throat." "Yes, I did." Oh, man. Well, we heard footsteps, and they got closer, and they got closer, and closer. And finally, we saw the flashlight beams of 2 other ghost hunters that weren't supposed to be down there. And the psychic, I'm so glad he said this first. He said, "Oh, thank God." That was as scared as I have been in a real long time.
I don't doubt it. We have around this area, which I live in North Carolina. That's where we're broadcasting from. We have what's called the Linville Caverns. And when you go in there, they do take you to a part, and they cut the lights off, and it is pitch black. You can put your hand right in front of your face, and you will not even see. You will see nothing.
Nothing.
And that is very spooky to be in a cave in the pitch black. Now I couldn't imagine looking for ghosts in a cave pitch black.
At 4 a.m.
Yeah, I was just taking a tour.
Who's talking to them?
Oh, that's
it was a lot of fun, though. In fact, this is a group called MAPI, the Mid-Atlantic Paranormal Investigators, I think. And they had they like to do the tech stuff, so they had all kinds of cameras and monitors and all this stuff set up, and it was really pretty neat. I mean, I'd never been on a ghost hunt before, and at 2 a.m. we were watching this monitor by a flagpole outside the museum, which is also supposed to be haunted. And, everyone would get excited every once in a while about an orb. Personally, I think orbs are just light reflected on dust, but
right.
A lot of people argue about that. Anyway, we were looking at the monitor, and suddenly these 3 orbs appear next to the flagpole. Now, most orbs just float around. These didn't float around. These stayed put, and they seemed to be vibrating. And we all said, "Now this is strange." Some of them really started to run around. I don't know why nobody went outside, because it was right outside, but they were running around inside the museum. And finally, we worked out into the outside. We're looking at the flagpole. We're looking around. A spider had spun a web across the camera lens. And the breeze was making it bounce around, and the camera read it as these 3 interconnected orbs. That was... I don't know. Someone told me most ghost hunts are boring. We were not bored that night.
It doesn't sound like it, that's for sure.
No, it was not a boring night. And there was actually one thing that I think was possibly paranormal, and that is they were using this thing. I don't know how it works, but it's a way of checking temperatures with this sort of, it almost looks like a pricing gun they use in the supermarket, and it shoots out a beam. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I do paranormal investigations myself. I actually have a group, and it's an infrared thermometer. And it can you can get them where they measure surface temperature or ambient and surface temperature. Yeah.
Okay, that's what he was doing. He was measuring ambient and surface temperature. Now, keep in mind, I don't do that. That's really not my thing. I was more or less along because I think ghost hunting is a very interesting contemporary phenomenon. But we can get to that in a minute. But so we're walking through this. There's something called, there's an historic trail running through the park, through the battlefield rather. And it's a nice little place. So, but it was, again, it's 3 or 4 in the morning. And we're poking around on this trail, and something, I swear, something was growling in the woods. I wasn't the only one who heard it. There was some animal out there that didn't like us being in the woods. So that was unnerving enough. But we're walking up and down this trail, and he's using this detector, and it picked up a very, very cold spot. It was 63 degrees that night, and this spot was 19 degrees.
Wow.
Yeah, it faded quickly, but this spot was 19 degrees, and we went back later. There was another cold spot there that also faded quickly. So, I mean, in retrospect, we should have stuck a little flag or something in the cold spot, because maybe it wasn't the exact same spot, but it certainly was in the area. It was a strange night. I will say that. I almost tripped on a turtle too, but that's another story.
Sound like you had a good time.
Oh, I had a great time. We're going to do another one soon. You see, as I was saying before, I think ghost hunting is really interesting for a lot of reasons. First of all, it's really the first time since the rise of spiritualism in the second half of the 19th century that lots and lots of people are getting involved with ghosts and spirits. And the question I ask is, why? Why now? I mean, I don't believe it can't all be TV. It can't all be movies. There must be something going on in our society that makes us want to do this now. And I don't know what it is, and I find that very interesting.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I mean, I'm one who I kind of credit it to the TV, especially with TAPS. I mean, that's grown to be such a huge show. Mm-hmm. But you're right, so many people are doing it now, me included. There's got to be something more to it. I agree with that. It
also interests me because of the possibility. You see, I believe that paranormal phenomena occur. I believe they do. I believe they happen. I am very wary about explanations of them, though. And when someone says, for example, if somebody sees an apparition, well, that's fine. They saw an apparition. I'm very wary when somebody tells me that apparition is the soul of the dead, blah, 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 or they regularly hear the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Well, that's because someone committed suicide in the cellar 85 years ago. I don't trust those connections. To my mind, if there was an apparition, there was an apparition. If there's a sound, there's a sound. But I tend to think that we do know that the people who have the experience are there. They're real. And I think it's more likely that it's them who's doing something. You see, one of the things I hang my hat on as far as believing in the paranormal is something called the Philip experiment. Are you familiar with that?
No, I can't say I am.
The Philip experiment was something that began in the early 1970s. It was carried out by the Toronto Society for Psychical Research under Dr. A.R.G. Owen. And they were working on the idea that they wanted to make seance phenomena occur in full light, and they wanted to... They felt that seance phenomena were really the result of the people taking part. So they sat down and they designed a spirit that they called Philip. Now, they spent a long time doing this. They drew a picture of Philip. They came up with a whole backstory of Philip, his life, the woman he was in love with, his biography, his likes, his dislikes, his hobbies, all these things. And Philip was a 17th century English nobleman, and they came up with a very dramatic legend for him, like the kind of legends that are associated with so many ghost stories. That he fell in love with a gypsy girl, but he was married to a very cold but frigid noblewoman named Theodora, and he allowed Theodora to have the woman that he loved put to death, and he eventually committed suicide. And they installed him in an actual castle that does exist in England. And then what they did was they sat down and they began to have seances trying to get in contact with Philip, a ghost that they knew did not exist. Mm-hmm. And they began to get results. They got intelligent responses in rapping. They had a simple rapping code, like 2 for yes and 1 for no. And they began to the table began to move. It began to slide across the floor. It began to tilt, and not just the normal old-fashioned seance table tilting. This would tilt far, far over on 2 legs, then come back. They got levitation twice. They got a few other phenomena like some metal bending and a few other things. But they did this for years, and they were able to create other characters very quickly once they got these results. Now, their feeling was that this was some kind of group phenomenon, that Philip was being created by the members of the group, and that the physical phenomena were the result of something that the group itself was generating. Now, they had evidence for this. Philip never knew anything, for example, that the group didn't know. They would ask because they worked on the possibility that maybe it is a real ghost that they've come into contact with. But Philip's knowledge was always limited to things that they had agreed on, or if they hadn't agreed on it, they would get very vague answers, like if they hadn't decided what color Philip's horse was, and they would ask him, Philip, is your horse brown? And they hadn't decided on that, they'd get a vague response. If they had decided on it, they'd get a very strong wrapping out of the answer. Now, I suspect that sometimes some ghost hunters might be working as a group, that working together, that they might be creating at least some of the phenomena that they see. Now, I'm not hidebound by this because I've seen evidence of possible actual spirits. I mean, intelligences that are not a part of the group, that know things the group doesn't know. But on a whole, I think the group has a lot to do with producing the phenomena that they research.
And that is some of the theories that are out there, that especially in regards to like EVPs, there are some who believe that these voices on the audio is projected by the one asking the questions because they want to hear the answer. And, you get into the power of the mind with things like that.
And I tend, like I said, my feeling is that we know those people are there. Mm-hmm. We know that. Everything else is hypothetical.
Right. Very true. Well, we've got a question that was coming from the chat room. Apparently a very big fan of your book.
Really?
Yes, Bambi wants to know a little bit about the bye-bye men.
Oh.
Well, she had two specific questions she wanted to also me to relay to you. One was, are you convinced on anything about the story of the bye-bye men, and does the story frighten you as much as it scares the heck out of her?
That is the only story that anyone has ever told me, and I have heard hundreds of first-hand accounts of I saw a ghost, my mother appeared to me walking on a beach the night she died 300 miles away. Mm-hmm. I've heard so many stories, some of them scary, especially things involving like hag attacks and things like that.
Yeah.
But this story genuinely scared me. It's the only one that genuinely scared me. I remember waking up the next morning and being very nervous about what might be on the other side of my bedroom door. Now, I won't tell the whole story here because it's a long story. But what was her other question?
Was also, were you convinced in the story, Annie? Convinced about it?
That it actually happened?
Well, or anything in the story is kind of how.
Well, I believe that it did happen. I mean, I know the principal. I know the person who told the story. In fact, he's going to be having his annual Halloween party in a few days, and he will be telling the story again. He does it every year, which is where I first heard it, and where it first gave me the deep heebie-jeebies. So, like I said, I do believe it happened. I think it's possible that something like the phenomenon that I described earlier with Philip might have been happening, that these three people who fooled around with a Ouija board and got in contact with this grotesque killer that claimed to be tracking them down psychically might have produced genuine phenomena. But whether this was the result of what they thought, it might have been they might have been producing the phenomena that they ascribed to this killer that they thought was coming for them. I think that's possible because I never found any supporting evidence for the existence of this killer. I guess I should flesh it out a little bit. You see, the name of the killer is the way he finds you. The more you think of his name, if you think about his name, it turns you into a psychic beacon, and he's able to track you down as long as you keep thinking of his name. If you stop thinking about his name, if he goes out of your thoughts, then that turns the beacon off. But as long as he's on your mind, he can track you down. And when he finds somebody, he cuts out their tongue and their eyes.
Wow.
Yeah, it was something that they got from fooling around with a Ouija board. The story came through after there was one spirit, there was sort of a moderator spirit that was in charge of this Ouija board, and it finally told them this story, that other spirits, they had been in contact with what seemed to be a bunch of different spirits, and they occasionally mentioned this character, and they wanted to know more, and the other spirits disappeared. And finally, the moderator, who called itself the spirit of the board, told them this story over a long period of time. And my friend, who loves the paranormal and has been spending years and years trying to have a paranormal phenomenon, trying to experience something paranormal, which never happens with him around. Never. He's like he's a big buzzkill when it comes to the paranormal. He kills it. Anyway, he tried to do everything he could to get this thing to happen, but no one else in the group would cooperate. I'm sort of stepping around a lot of details because, like I said, it is a long story.
All right.
Which, believe it or not, has been optioned by Hollywood, but we'll see about that.
Well, let me ask you this. We've got about 10 minutes left, and like I said, I mean, if we do go a little over, there's no problem there. They can listen to it on the archives. What is your favorite story out of all the research you've done?
Well, that's a tough one. The story that Bambi asked about is way up there. Like I said, it's one of the few stories to ever genuinely scare me. And you know what part of it is? It takes me back to some of those urban legends that we told each other as kids. the story about how if you look in the mirror and say Bloody Mary and spin around, she's going to come out through the mirror and tear your face off. Mm-hmm. I mean, those stories about murderers and witches and the couple that's parked out there in the lover's lane in the middle of the night and something hideous happens, they scare you in a special way, those campfire tales. I don't know what it is, but they have a way of getting under your skin. And the story that Bambi was talking about did that to me. It got under my skin. I have pretty much been doing this. This is what I do. You know, I wake up in the morning and I check to see what's up with Bigfoot and what's up with ghosts and what's up with this. It's what I do. I spend all day writing about it or researching about it or emailing about it. And that was one of the few to genuinely frighten me. There are others. I find those stories of hag attacks very frightening. I find the stories about the sudden death among the Hmong, for example, the people in Wisconsin from Asia who report being attacked by demons and then die in their sleep. I find that very spooky too. But that was the one that really got to me.
And, you know, like I said, I do paranormal research, and you're right. I'm a very hard person to scare, but when I first heard, you know, just kind of relating back to the story of the Bye-Bye Man, first heard EVPs. I heard about them over a radio show, Coast to Coast AM to be exact, about this group, and this is what they specialize in. And I went to their site, and I sat there for 4 hours listening to these EVPs, and they just had bukus of them, pages and pages of them. And I tell you, that's just scared the heck out of me to think that was a possibility. And, I mean, that night I went to bed. I couldn't even hang my arm over the side of the bed. It took me hours
and let me ask
to get
you a
to
question.
sleep.
When you were a kid, were you afraid to have your feet or your arms hanging over the bed?
Yes, I was. I have to say I was. You know, I was always one who...
It takes you back to being a child. Isn't it amazing?
It does. I was always one walking through the hallways, looking around my shoulder, you know.
Me too.
Through the house. And we lived kind of out away from the town and stuff. You know, we had like 27 acres of woods to play on kind of thing. And, you know, I guess maybe just being out there away from everything, it made it a little more spooky as a kid. And, of course, there was little ghost stories that always, you know, was around the neighborhood of, you know, we had a ghost ambulance that supposedly come up and down the road and things like that.
I've never heard of a ghost ambulance.
Yeah, we had it up and down our dirt road. I'd never seen it. I'd heard the story a couple of times. But, yeah, I was always spooked around there, and I'd walk through the hallways, and I'd look over my shoulder, I'd pass by a door, and swear an arm reached out and tried to touch me, you know.
Do you know the cure for that?
What's that?
You have to hold your breath, close your eyes, and run down the hall as fast as possible.
I'm pretty sure I probably did that.
I don't know why, but that was my approach to it.
But yeah, I mean it's funny, you know. Now older, actually researching the paranormal, it's kind of funny to reflect back on stuff like that and think, man, I was just scared to death. You know, especially the nights we were out there till 1, 2 o'clock in the morning in the middle of the woods. Mm-hmm. You know, and this is like, you know, 8, 9, 10 years old, running around the woods, you know, playing. And we always had another story there of we had a cow pen out in the middle of the woods, and we always shared the story. Where it originated from, I really have no idea, of these beasts with red eyes, and they would come out after midnight, and no specific day, just whenever they kind of felt like it. And we would sit up in the trees. Of course, you know, as a kid, we were huge tree climbers, mm-hmm. and we would climb up in the trees with our BB guns and sit there and wait for the beast with red eyes.
Well, you know, there is something called orange eyes, which I think is from Ohio. It started out in Ohio, if I remember right. And orange eyes was a Lover's Lane ghost, and it was just huge. Whatever it was huge, and it had orange eyes. And couples that were fooling around in the lovers' lanes would suddenly be confronted by this monstrous creature with orange eyes staring in at them. And apparently what it usually was a prankster who took 2 orange reflectors and put them on a stick.
Oh. Oh, man, that is just too funny. Well, listen, we've got about 5 minutes left, so I got one more question, and then we'll have to probably sign off here. And that is, do you have anything in the future, any more books coming out, any more projects dealing with the strange and weird?
Sure, actually, yeah, I've got a few. For people that read the Fortean Times, I've got a piece in the new issue on a very interesting poltergeist from West Virginia. It was apparently a poltergeist that converted to Catholicism. Just a very odd story. And this man who had been harassed by the poltergeist, after it converted to Catholicism, he ended up giving the church this big plot of land down in what is now West Virginia. It was Virginia at the time. And it's still a Catholic retreat. And there's a monument there to him. The poltergeist was called the Wizard Clip because it clipped things into little crescent shapes. And there's a monument to him, a relief, where he's standing there. His name was Adam Livingston. He's standing there with these little crescents under his feet, looking up at a fiery cross. Interesting place. Very beautiful. And I'm working on something that's kind of unusual. Everyone knows about haunted houses, but I've been working on I'm collecting information for a possible book on houses that were designed for spirits. That is to say, the people, instead of just having something become haunted after a while for something that happened there or was believed to have happened there, these houses were designed with spirits in mind. So, for example, there was the Trapezium House down in Petersburg, which has no right angles in it. Not a single right angle in the house. Not in the windows, not in the stairs, not in the roof, not on the floor, nothing. And supposedly the man who built it had the idea that evil spirits hung out in right angles. So he built a house without them. This includes houses that were built under the design of spirits through mediums. And, of course, the Winchester House, which might have been built to either confuse spirits that Mrs. Winchester thought were after her or possibly provide them with a place to live, or maybe both, and might have been built under spirit influence. No one knows. So this is something I'd like to turn into a book sometime, but right now I'm really collecting the information. It's a big subject. I've got there's this other. I'm doing another ghost. I'm going to another place down in Virginia soon, which is supposed to be the most haunted hotel in the United States, and we'll see what happens there.
Well, I have to say, I'm sure a lot of us will be looking forward to it. I mean, really, this is some fascinating stuff. And, you know, like I say, I really appreciate you coming on tonight. It was just a load of fun.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Stories.
When you have 2 hours, when you go up to 2 hours, let me know. We can start talking about the cannibal midgets of Wyoming.
Well, there we go. So, yeah, we'll definitely have to get you back on now that we have more time and we can broadcast live. I just hate to cheat the listeners out of a live broadcast, so I've always stuck with an hour, even though we could go 2.
Okay.
But now we can broadcast live for 2 hours. So, man, it's gonna be great.
It will be. I'm looking forward to it.
So, yeah, we'll have to stay in touch, and we'll get you back on, and I'm sure we'll make 2 hours pass by like it's nothing.
That we will. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, again, that was Robert Schneck. Very, very fun show there. Some great stories. Stories like that are always interesting. You always love to hear some of the weird and strange tales around. We've done a few shows on the past, but I have to say, by far, that was one of the funnest ones we've done. And hopefully Robert will join us again when we go to 2 hours. I would love to have him on for 2 hours. Again, thanks to those who joined us, all you guys in the chat room. As always, you guys are great. I always appreciate you hanging around with us, giving us some good questions, good ideas. You know, the listeners are a huge part of our show here, and we plan to stick with that. As always, you can visit our site, shadowsinthedarkradio.com. You can see our upcoming shows, read information on past shows, and read the bios on our guests that we have. We always have links there as well that will let you know about some of our guests we had on the shows. We have our links to their books, their websites, all kinds of things there. Also, visit our sister site, EasternParanormalInvestigators.com. We are getting ready to revamp that site, so look for that. That should happen by Friday, we're hoping. We are hoping by November the 2nd to have our new site up. Here on Blog Talk Radio, we're at blogtalkradio.com/Shadows in the Dark, and MySpace at myspace.com/Shadows in the Dark Radio. Shadows in the Dark was created, produced, and hosted by yours truly, Jeremiah Greer, and you can email me at jgreer@shadowsinthedarkradio.com. Don't forget to participate in our Tell Your Paranormal Experience poll. We will be reading those stories November the 29th, so make sure you participate. Without the stories, we can't do the show, so we want to make sure we have plenty to read. Of course, I will be sharing some of my own experiences, a little more detailed of some of the stories we told tonight, the monsters with red eyes, some of the stuff I did as a kid, where we had a lot of little ghost stories flourishing around the neighborhood. Also, tune in this Wednesday. We are going to broadcast Wednesday, 11 p.m., hour and a half. It's our Halloween special. I will tell you the history of Halloween, and I will be taking your calls on your spooky tales and your ghost stories. Again, thanks, everyone, for joining us, and always remember to be watchful of those shadows in the dark.
Shadows.